Welcome to Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Modelovitz. Today, we're going to be talking about managing conflict and expectations. So, we're going to be addressing misunderstandings and differing expectations in our intergenerational teams. And we have a special guest today who will be joining us. What's really important to understand is getting those clarifications, understanding how we communicate, and how we're going to interact with our inner team members. So, are you clarifying what your expectations are? Are you identifying those communication preferences? As we've talked about on previous shows, people communicate at different ways, and their background, experience, age really matters in the words and the communication styles they use. It can go from email, it can be a Slack channel, it can be text, it can be just simply talking to each other. And those all matter because you need to understand what the preferences are of the people who you're talking to. And for anybody who is spoken to either a group or to individuals, what you say is not always understood by the other person. They don't always hear what you are saying. And it's incumbent upon you to understand that and find ways to help that communication. And misunderstandings, especially, are always going to come up, especially with communicating with teams and over different age groups and experiences. And you have to have things in place to resolve those misunderstandings between the groups. But one thing that gets left out a lot, and I've seen this in the companies that I've worked in, is that we often prepare our workers for what's the expectations in the workplace, but we don't at the same time prepare the leaders for that environment. They aren't learning how to communicate with people of different ages and experiences. And when you're building intergenerational teams, and as we've talked about on previous shows and we will in the future, we have the studies all show that intergenerational teams are the most productive and have the best innovation because you have those different experience levels that can bring a different view to the way things are working. So it's really important to manage any conflict and any expectations. They're going to come of those. I was working at doing a consulting gig at a very large corporation. It was multinational, and not only did we have different ages expectations, but we had different cultures. Now, the nature of this was we eventually made the changes in over 120 countries. So you can imagine the communication difficulties in that. And I had a younger worker who was in the Asian theater, and we had a different style of communication. And when we initially started talking, there were a lot of misunderstandings. Part of it was cultural, but a lot of it was intergenerational because I had certain style and expectations, and he had a certain style and expectations, and they didn't always come together. But what we found is the best way to communicate. So he didn't like talking through the problem just necessarily, but he needed a lot of data, and that's the way he worked. So I would send him various pieces of it, what my expectations, explanations, give him a chance because he needed to chew over it. He didn't have, for him, it didn't work as well that he could take that in on a very quick basis. But that was fine because he did phenomenal work for me. But we just had to find that balance of where the communication was. And his experiences and my experiences were very different. And when you're especially talking over that many time zones, it's important to get it right. So just an example, and I have found this in other places that I've been. I had this guy who always liked to text me or send me, Slack messages, but he wasn't good at talking. Now, the funny part about it is that he happened to be in the cubicle next to me at the place I was working, and he sent me this whole series of questions. I want to know this, this, and this. And I just stood up, looked over the partition, and said, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, and sat back down. And a few moments later, he meekly came around the side and said, what was that? And I said, well, I've discovered that we aren't communicating efficiently. So I said, for me, I like to talk. I like to do management by walking around. For you, you prefer to do it electronically. Let's find a compromise. And we were able to do that. So we got a mix. I was able to teach him how to communicate more verbally. He was able to teach me how to communicate more efficiently electronically. And it worked out for both of us. And then we ended up with this nice meld of how those things worked. So it's really important to understand who you're talking to and how they're going to respond. So today we have a person who's had an opportunity to work in these situations and has some great experience with intergenerational teams. So Eric Feinendegen, he's an executive vice president of client relations at Grade Point Financial. He's a two-time finalist in the Toastmasters World Champion of Public Speaking. And remember, that's a worldwide audience, and to land on that particular stage. He's president and founder of Inspire to Empower. He's a John C. Maxwell certified coach and trainer, a professional speaker, and author of The Finer Things, a 52-week guide to living an inspired life. We're looking forward here to be talking with Eric Feinendegen. So after a word from our sponsor, we'll have a great opportunity to talk with Eric. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Bridging of Ages. Today we have a special guest, Eric Feinendegen. Hello, Eric. Welcome.
Dan, hello. Welcome. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, great. You got quite a great resume, and we appreciate you taking time out to talk with us and our audience. And just wanted to let's get into it. You have a lot of experience working with intergenerational teams over the years, and the nature of the work you kind of do and the people you speak to, come from all different backgrounds, experience levels. I know that you have people in your organization that have a great deal of experience, all the way down to those who it's their very first job. And, they're coming at it from a very different expectation. I'm sure you've run into some of the communication difficulties, but you're a man who really understands communication and how to get across your ideas. So I'm just curious, when somebody comes to your organization, how do you really clarify those work expectations?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. And that's an excellent question. As you mentioned, I have the opportunity to work with people from all different walks of life, generations, ages. And I'll admit that is a challenge because people come from different backgrounds, histories, they have different cultures and different behaviors. So I think as we're trying to, meld and work together with people amongst generations, what we need to do is ask questions. Because you brought up that word clarity. And I think one of the biggest challenges people have, especially young leaders, is they lead by assumption. And I know when I was first starting out as a leader, that's what I was doing. I fell into the trap that, oh, well, people see the world how I see it. Right. And when I would communicate, I would express my ideas and my thoughts and expectations based on how I saw things and how I did things. And as you can imagine, right, that caused some conflict at times because, again, we're all different. So, what I learned through experience and, just through communicating over time is when we ask questions for clarity and have an understanding that people see the world different than we see the world, and we go at it from their perspective, not ours, that really helps in communication. And, I have to continue to remind myself of that as we bring on new leaders and Dan, as we bring on leaders from other organizations, because culture is different everywhere we go. And we have to respect that. We have to respect the history. And I think when we approach communication from that angle, it really helps diffuse any conflict and offer clarity.
That's great. Yeah, that's all very important. That communication piece is so vital. And it sounds like you've also found that in yourself, and I have found that also as I've grown into, the work that I do, that my expectations aren't necessarily the same as the other person. But also, there's a power dynamic that you always have to be careful. I mean, you are an executive vice president. Somebody comes in right out of school, either is brash or is scared of you. And in order to get the best work out of them, fear is not the way to go. And I know your style that you're not like that. And I'm just kind of curious. You talked about how they communicate differently and have a different cultural bent as they come into your organization. And we'll get into also, I know you do this when you're doing part of your speaking career, that how do you adjust? How do you identify those communication preferences? Like I was saying in the story, I have come across, some people are just like, it's on Slack or forget it. I'm not looking at it. But then they set up so many channels that nobody has a comprehensive piece that they're looking at, or it's only text. Or I've had some workers that go, I only look at my email, or dreaded with I found in some of my younger workers is picking up the phone. And you're a very, client oriented business.
Yes.
So I'm just curious how you work with their communication preferences, but at the same time, try to have them understand that they have to adjust to other people's ways of communicating.
Yeah. I would offer two things in terms of that, Dan. The first would be to stay curious. As someone who has the opportunity to work with people that are older than me, younger than me, same age as me, what I like to do, and let's use an example of people, in the senior generation or seniors, I'll ask them flat out, say, great, when we're communicating, what would be your preference? Would it be email, me picking up the phone and calling you? Do you prefer a text, direct message, whatever it may be? And as a leader, Dan, and I would offer this to anyone who's in a leadership role, anyone who tries to communicate, is we have to adapt. right? We have to be able to switch some of the things that we may be comfortable with in order to be able to communicate effectively with those, again, that are maybe older or younger than us. The other thing I would offer would be we have to focus on the why. Let's say I'm bringing in a new leader into my organization.
Mhm.
They may be focused on the what. Okay, Eric, what do I need to do at this in this job or in this position? What is it that your expectation is of me? So a lot of people have the what questions, and that's fantastic. But let's go back to COVID really quick, because if anything, if COVID and the pandemic taught us anything, it's this: that people value the why even more than the what. Take a look at remote work. All right. Well, here's what we're going to do, right? We're going to work, through the pandemic, 50% at home, 50% in the office. Okay, that's great. But Eric, why are we doing that? And I think when we focus on the why first, and then we switch into the what, that can really help in the communication process. Well, here's why we need to do this, because we have to be able to interact as a company, interact with our clients and customers, be productive, but also because we want to make sure people are safe and secure, in what they're doing. So the couple things, which is we have to be able to adapt, and we have to focus on the why, can really help manage the expectations as we continue to move forward in our communication.
That's great. And COVID really taught us all a lot. And we had to learn different ways to communicate. And even just something like we're doing now, where we are so used to now talking over electronic um, medium. And one of the things that I found is really interesting is that I wasn't expecting in the beginning was that you can get real feeling, emotion, and all these different uh, emotions and feelings and what you really want to get across on an electronic medium. I didn't expect that. I thought it would be very cut and dry. And I'm finding, and especially the interactions, and people are getting used to it. And I'm sure you found this in your own work. What else are they doing on the screen while they're talking to you? So a lot of people are used to multitasking. And I know with my teams, I had to teach them. I was working on this large international project a little bit ago, and I knew they were looking at other things. They were reading their channels and those kind of things. It really was important. But I said, you have to be in my meeting while we're in our meeting. And not always an easy thing to do, but it became very important. Um, and that's part of learning those different styles, because I found the expectations. I was the oldest person on the team. So the expectation was I wouldn't understand the tech. The funny thing is I ended up teaching it to other people.
Yeah.
I was teaching it to somebody half my age. So, that goes with the assumptions. But I could not assume just because somebody was new to the place that they didn't have ideas that counted. So I'm curious how you kind of draw that out, because you've probably seen people, you've been in a meeting, and there's some people who talk freely and it's easy for them, and others are quiet. How do you get them to communicate and to draw out? And I have found it tends to be some of the younger workers who are holding back. And I said, we always have to be aware there is a power division there that people always feel in the workplace.
Yeah.
So I just was curious how you bring that out, because that kind of goes into, when we're going to get into, dealing with those misunderstandings and
Yeah.
miscommunications.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I want to talk to your first point about communicating, virtually, and then we'll get to how we get to
Okay, great. That would be
encourage
great.
people to communicate more freely. I think it's important as, again, we're continuing to work amongst generations. It's more important to realize what's not being said versus what is being said, and especially in a virtual environment. You know, I when I teach communication, I say, hey, you know, it's all a transfer of energy. As leaders, as people that they're working among different environments, we have to be able to realize, okay, what is it that's not being said? And you mentioned, people they're distracted on Zoom or whatnot. All right, we have to read that body language. We have to read those nonverbal cues. We have to understand how they're communicating, through their energy. Are they closed off? What is it that they're bringing nonverbally? And I think it'll help the audience that are, audience members that are looking to really hone in and improve the communication is, okay, yes, people communicate through the words, but it's that nonverbal communication that we really have to grasp and understand and react to. So I would just offer that in terms of, communicating virtually. But here's what I found, Dan. To your point, not everybody wants to offer information. They may have a great idea, but they're reserved, their personality, they may be more of an introvert, and that's fine. What I like to do is create an environment of safety. Let people know up front, we want to hear from you. We respect your idea. And here's the other thing that I tell people. I think when we create the expectation up front, we have much better outcomes. When people come on my team, I will tell them right off the bat, we will disagree. We're going to have tough and difficult conversations. Right? This is a business. This isn't kumbaya, where we're coming, right? No, this is a business. It's going to be difficult at times. And I will tell them, I foster disagreement when it's done in a respectful manner. We want different ideas, alternating opinions. I want contrarian viewpoints. And I think when you let people know up front, hey, I welcome disagreement. I welcome this as long as we're, again, respecting the individual, honoring the process, letting people know you're not going to be judged. You won't, you're not going to be penalized for offering a different opinion of me. I'll never forget it, Dan. One of my very first jobs out of school, I worked for a Fortune 500 company. And very early in my career, I found myself, for whatever reason, reporting to a vice president of a Fortune 500 company. Now, you want to talk about being afraid and scared? Well, this guy, and again, he was great at what he did, but it was almost like talking to an echo chamber. He asked for people's, input, but he never take it. And what I realized, going through working for him, I was like, well, why would he even offer an idea if it was rejected or not even accepted? It didn't have to be acted upon, but it wasn't even accepted and, even considered. So getting back to your question, I think to encourage introverts or people that may be hesitant to offer their ideas, let them know right up front, hey, this is a safe space. We want to hear from you, right? You're going to disagree with me. That's okay. I'm going to disagree with you at times. That's okay. We're going to respect the process, but we're all going to move forward together because of it. And I think that really helps a lot.
That's great. Yeah, because I know one of the things I like to do is if I see somebody holding back all the time, I will try to have a private conversation with them. I had a younger worker who I knew he was brilliant, but would never put forward the ideas. Got some great work out of him in a quiet area, but I talked to him and I said, I see those gears moving in your head. You've got some stuff to give us. And he slowly opened up. And he was an introvert because I understand. I was that guy early in my career. I had great ideas, but I was afraid to speak up and I had to find my voice too. So, and I told him that, and that seemed to help. It's
Well,
really important to help them find that voice. And especially, you're in a business that you're talking to customers all the time.
yes.
You have to you have to be able to talk to people who are unlike yourself, and it's really important. Yeah, so I appreciate some of those insights there. It's great how you're really trying to encourage it, but I love that idea that you tell them up front that I want you to disagree with me,
Yes.
because especially in the intergenerational teams, I find that those ideas going back and forth just supercharge the innovation.
And Dan, I just want to talk to what you were just mentioning in terms of you trying to get information out of a brilliant young worker. And that
Hmm.
goes back to where we have to respect people's history.
Hmm.
That worker may have come from a culture or an environment where they were taught, hey, be seen but not heard. Right. I grew up Catholic, right? So it was all right, what? Show up, do what you're told, that kind of thing. Those my Catholic friends know that, but it's right, be seen, not heard, right? Do as you're told, and there's gonna be no problems. I say that facetiously, but people are coming from environments where maybe ideas weren't accepted. It was an environment where, hey, show up, do as you're told, right? And that's the way we do things around here. So I think we have to respect that not everybody comes from an environment where ideas are accepted. So yeah, respecting people's history and where they come from and honoring that and working through that, I think can be helpful for all of us.
Yeah, and I'd like to relate this a little bit to your speaking career,
Mhm.
um, and how you get across to people who have different experiences and may not be hearing what you're saying, and how you tend to sense that and help them understand.
Yeah. Well, we were talking offline, Dan, that what we say is not necessarily what people hear.
Hmm.
There's a lost in translation kind of concept that's happening here. But yeah, I've had the opportunity to speak all across the world, many different audiences across generations, and when I walk into a situation where I'm going to be communicating with people that they don't look like me, they don't sound like me, they don't believe in what I believe, what I have to do is do my research. I have to know my audience. I'll never forget it. It was about 10 years ago. I was speaking in Dublin, Ireland to a Toastmasters group. And
Okay.
Dan, yeah, I had a story that I was sharing and I talked about Oreo cookies. And it came to the part, in the presentation where I said, so I was eating this Oreo, and then all of a sudden I saw this blank look at all these people in the audience. And immediately I thought, okay, wait a second. Oreos are popular in the States. They're not
Uh-huh.
popular in Dublin. And I had to adjust on the fly. And that was my mistake
Hmm.
because I walked into a situation again, viewing the landscape based on how I view the world, not from my audience's perspective. So, what I learned from that is, hey, Eric, in every situation, and I don't care if it's a one on one situation, whether you're on stage speaking to thousands, I think the more you know the hopes, the wants, the dreams of the audience or the person that you're talking to, the listener, the better we're all going to be. So I think just doing some background check, doing some research, and really getting to know the people you're communicating with um, is critical. Because here's another challenge I see in today's landscape because communication's happening so fast, so quick, things are changing so rapidly that, and I fall into this trap as well, that we forget to know the person, right? We're so focused on the process that us as individuals get kind of lost in the muck. I think if we know the person first, then the process will reveal itself over time. And I think that can be helpful for all of us.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, we're going to have a note from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll be continuing our conversation with Eric Feinendegen. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Bridging of Ages with my guest, Eric Feinendegen. So, Eric, we've talked a lot about how we prepare our workers for communication, how you talk with them, the expectations that you set, how you're managing some of the conflicts and the different communication styles. I'm curious, let's look at the other side. How do you prepare your leaders? So you have people who, you have leaders who work for you who are going to have teams, and those teams are going to be different in ages and experience levels and cultures, but you have this common purpose and this works in both, I know, your speaking career where you are training other businesses and in your own business that you're part of. And it's important to understand, what are you doing for those leaders so that they can help, continue this process, because you're very focused on having your teams work as efficiently as possible.
Boy, Dan, how much time do we have for this question? Right? Because I got about 3 hours of material here.
No, well, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, right. No, I'll keep it as brief as possible. I think one of the biggest things we can do to help prepare our leaders is engage in a mentorship program. People do what people see. And it's very important, as a leader to mentor emerging workers. One of the biggest challenges I see are people, they're not prepared properly to lead teams. They may be great at what they do, let's say as a salesperson or in a customer service role or whatever. And let's use the sales example because I see this all the time. Hey, you got a number one salesperson, right? And she's killing it in terms of commissions or whatever. And then because they're great at what they do in sales, we automatically assume, oh, well, they're resourced enough and they're educated. Let's throw them in a leadership position and they're going to have the same results. No. Again, we're leading by assumption, right? And we forget that the skill set is completely different, right? From one job to the next. And that's the biggest mistake I see when organizations are trying to nurture and bring on new leaders. So I think mentorship is critical when we're doing that, but also delegation. One of the challenges that I have being a type A personality is delegating not only tasks, but authority. And that's another challenge is, okay, great. I'll give you something to do, but am I giving you the authority to make the decisions on that as well? We have to allow people to fail. And when it comes to leadership, you learn by doing. we have to understand that people are they're going to get their knees bloodied, right? They're going to make mistakes. We have to be able to accept some of those mistakes. Let people learn, let people grow. Dan, I have a 15-year-old right now. He's learning to drive a car.
Okay.
And just yesterday, he said, "Dad, can I get behind the wheel?" And I'm like, as soon as I get all nervous, "Sure, Ben, here are the keys." And as challenging as it was for me to sit in that passenger seat, right, and deal with the fact that, okay, this is going to be difficult, I have to allow him to experience the road, to make decisions on his own when a car may pull out in front of him or brake early. Yes, I can help him navigate along the way, but he's got to experience that himself. And we're bringing on new leaders. Let's delegate tasks, delegate that authority, mentor them through that. And Dan, I promise I'll end with this. I want to offer one more thing. And this goes back to communication. It's feedback. Leaders, I think, are not getting the appropriate feedback that they deserve. Nor are we, as current leaders, getting feedback. Listen, I have to remind myself, Eric, you don't have all the answers. Eric, you may be doing things that could be irritating to people, or you may be communicating in a way where it's just not coming across. I have to continually ask my team, am I offering information in a way that you're understanding it? Are you able to accept my ideas, that makes sense to you? And I think when we offer feedback and ask for feedback, it goes back to the very first thing that you mentioned at the beginning, Dan. It leads to that clarity. And when we have clarity, that improves communication across generations. All right, Dan, there's my 3-hour answer in about 5 minutes.
That's great, and we'll talk further in the
Yes,
future.
yes.
And I know you and I have talked about
Oh, yeah.
delegation and and it's really important. You're right. It's a feedback loop. You can't just throw it over the wall. And that giving it up of saying, I know if I do it, it'll take an hour, and if they do it, it'll take 3. But you have to let them do it, because then
Yes,
eventually they'll get to that hour. But
yes.
you're giving them the opportunity to learn, and that mentorship piece is so important. And I'm sure you have found this also. Whenever I've been in a mentorship situation, if we didn't both learn, I didn't think it was successful. And there's a term that's bandied about now called reverse mentorship, where the younger person mentors the older one, or the junior person, mentors the senior person. I know in my own career that I was fortunate when I moved into program management and those kind of things, project management. I had a great mentor, and it made the difference for me able to learn how to do it properly and make the mistakes and have somebody who had my back. And, especially in large corporations, if you don't have a mentor, you don't raise to the higher ranks. It just doesn't happen. You really need somebody to take you under their wing. But I think it's also important that mentors have to understand, like you said, they don't have all the answers. And you have to be open to that and have that communication loop. And I love your talking about letting go, and teaching a kid to drive is a great example. I've been through that. Any parent should get an award for that, because unlike their teacher who has an extra break,
Right.
you're at the mercy of that teenager with all the hormones swashing around trying to figure it out while you're trying not to yell at them. So that's all great stuff. So we've just gone across some great ideas, really understanding how you're able to work with people of different backgrounds, different ages, and meld your teams. And I really like the fact that you're really looking at your leaders and understanding that they need that boost in training and mentorship, not just the people who work for them. It was a great point. So I want to thank you, Eric, for joining me today. And I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future. You've got a vast array of knowledge. And I want anybody who is interested, take a look at Eric's website and look at bringing him on to help train your teams. And after this word from our sponsor, we'll be back to wrap up today's show. Thank you much, Eric.
Thanks, Dan.
Welcome back to Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Modelovitz. Just had a great interview with my guest, Eric Feinendegen. Just wanted to give you a chance to look at some of the action items that you can take that we've learned from our discussion with Eric. What's really important is now that you have this knowledge is how can you act on it and to improve the intergenerational teams that work in your organization or business. So let's look at action item number 1. Create work expectations. As Eric was talking about, you have to set those expectations up front and communicate them properly and make sure that the person that you're working with understands. And that's important from the worker side, and it's important from the leader side. They both have to understand the expectations of the business, of the organization, and as Eric said, the why of why you are doing this, not just the what. So action item 2 is determining the communication preferences and finding ways to resolve misunderstandings. As we talked about, people communicate differently. They don't always hear what you have to say in the same way that you thought you said it. And that's just learning for each person. And there may be different ways of communicating electronically, in person, across video. All those kind of things are important, but we also have to have a central place where we all agree that we will be looking at the same stuff. So determine the other person's communications preferences, but they also have to understand yours. And then you can work out ways of resolving those misunderstandings in case they don't understand, and really set up a feedback loop like Eric talked about so that people are able to come back and ask questions and clarifications. Action item 3, prepare and train your leadership. Often I've seen we've set up ways of setting expectations for our workers, but not all leadership. And as Eric was saying, you can have somebody who is brilliant at what they do, like the salesperson you talked about. But when they were moved into a management position, it's a totally different set of skills. And they understood the salespeople that worked for them, but didn't necessarily understand what was involved in being their leader. And that can be mentored, that can be taught. And it's important as you move people up to not just throw them out there and make sure that you can help them be more efficient. So we have our 3 action items that you can try yourself. Create work expectations, determine communication preferences and resolve misunderstandings, and prepare and train your leadership. So the tip of the day is set, then manage expectations. Because if you do that in the beginning, the other items that you are working on with the action items and what you learned from our discussion today will really start to work for you. And you will have powerful intergenerational teams that will create more innovation and be more productive than you can imagine. This has been Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelovitz. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Invest in brain power, fuel brilliance.